Cyberpunk 2077 is a pessimistic game. Good people don't exist any longer in 2077's Night City. If they did, they'd be chewed up by the crushing inevitability of the machine and its eventual co-opting of even the best individuals. This has always been the case for the genre. Chemical dependencies and hedonistic attractions are the hallmarks of a land given itself over to technology. The environment has been purged of its resources in the name of advancement. The individuals in these dystopian stories have a common understanding that advancement eventually ends in a desolate waste. But temporary solace can be sought in the perpetuation of the advancing agents themselves. The combined weight of these disparate engines, advancement, societal nourishment, personal betterment, cannot be sustained, so something's got to give. Cyberpunk, the idea, envisions a world where the easiest path is heralded. Cyberpunk praises devotion to chromatic abstractions at the expense of your mortality, your skin. Cyberpunk believes that the future is dead, so therefore its people are dead too, living out a dream that they'll soon wake from and wonder, where did humanity go? But this only in their final moments, when no course correction can be made. Brief note, I'll hit spoilers up to the title card, show some gameplay up to about 15 hours past it, show a few clips from some nomad missions, but no character deaths or anything. A far cry from its promise of open rebellion, unfathomable depth, a new recourse, Cyberpunk 2077 instead operates under the tacit assumption that this too shall pass, as all video games do. There are levels, points that you dump into attributes and individual perks, damage per second stats, limitations. At the game's outset, when the world first opens, you're inundated with neon icons, unwanted phone calls, the technological prowess of Night City, the infinite possibility. But quickly you come to grips with these aspects, and for some the experience might become rote. Answer the text or call from some Night City personality, follow the glowing line to some warehouse, sneak by if you can, and blast the guards when you inevitably get discovered, jack your personal link into a computer identical to the last, and make your way out. Collect your reward, done. The same routine we've been performing ad nauseum for decades in open-world games. Some of these are missions on the main quest, and these pack a little more oomph, but they're not terribly different on the whole from the side quests. The mantle of different that Cyberpunk's marketing has bestowed upon it therefore goes largely unearned. Outside the initial shock the blasé attitude toward the mature content brings, you've played Cyberpunk 2077 before. You've talked through its dialogue trees and Obsidian's oeuvre. You've hacked, snuck, and lost yourself in its body modifications in Deus Ex. You've tinkered with its exotic, elemental, or bullet-homing smart guns in Borderlands. You've allocated its ability points and perks in Divinity. You've seen its expansive, beautiful, vertical future cityscape in Crackdown, and you've ridden its vehicles in Grand Theft Auto. That Cyberpunk cops from its predecessor so brazenly harkens to the Picasso quote, "Lesser artists borrow, great artists steal." Whether Cyberpunk is borrowing or stealing, well, that's up to interpretation. I came to enjoy my time playing as V. Though initially a bit of a blank slate, as the game progressed, hers developed into a story that was deeply personal, that of someone who is alone, trying to make a way for herself in the city, unsure of how much of herself to give over to the void to reach her goals. Oftentimes V responded as the most human individual in the room, antithetical to the sociopathic corporate execs, the techno lowlifes, the dealers, the fuzz. That might have just been the dialogue choices I picked, but I'd hazard that most players felt the same. V is the only human left alive, so to speak, and you watch her downfall, and that of the people around her. You participate in her corruption, her disgrace, her lows, her impossible fight to maintain a piece of herself, even as Night City vies to take it away. She makes odd friendships with an AI, a hacker, a Yakuza-esque crime family member, a nomadic drifter trying to make a way for herself if revenge doesn't come back to bite her first. You hope that V's insistence that the drifter make a new life for herself in Night City falls on deaf ears. You don't want her to have any part of what you're slowly becoming. Cyberpunk is a game in which goodness and virtue are only at the expense of something else. And since Night City is filled with so much noise, only the strongest of emotions, the negative ones, can be heard above the din. Death, loss, grief, anger. On a mission outside the city's boundary, V remarks that it's quiet all the way out here. No buzz, no hum, even so close to the monolithic entity that is the never-ending city. Good things, those get swallowed in the noise. All that's left are the raw, unsheathed power lines that gird the city. At its core, Cyberpunk 2077 is a very human, relatable story, but the gameplay loop doesn't support the story's weight. Each carefully crafted story mission vignette about consciousness, the soul, the humanity of artificial intelligence is undone by each cyber psycho you kill. The rumination on death, the finality of it, runs counter to the death races, where your race navigator becomes gunner and open fires on the opposite racers. Cyberpunk runs this high-wire routine between being a talking, sneaking, hacking game first and foremost, and devolving to shooting at the first hint of resistance. And the game, it knows that. It knows you're going to have to shoot some stuff, and that stuff is going to shoot back. It says as much in every inventory screen. The guns and melee weapons, most of which control pretty well for an immersive sim, have numbers tied to their damage output, a color-coded rarity or iconic status, with the ability to be modded to tweak some stat. Your quick hack programs, available on your cyberdeck, have numbers tied to how much damage they do when you highlight an enemy, spend rechargeable RAM, and upload the software to them. The later body modifications like Mantis arms and the monowire have numbers that tell you how much damage they do. While Cyberpunk prides itself on fleshed out characters, dialogue posed in real locales with realistic character movement, Night City cares not for words. Only death, only causing pain. Stealth, my preferred route, quickly became a game of, can I safely take out even one Maelstrom goon before everyone is aware of my presence? Since there are numbers tied to my damage output, not every silenced pistol headshot is an instant kill, which is fine. But enemies are linked in with one another's implants, so one non-fatal shot on an enemy means that all enemies are alert. I've got to take them out in one go, or not at all. But if the only reliable way to stealthily incapacitate a guard is to sneak up behind them and grab them, well, surely there are situations where that isn't viable. Either I can't distract them away from their pal by turning on the TV or using a whistle program, or someone spots me on my approach because my stealth level in the background isn't high enough. And to level that stealth stat, I've got to take stealthy actions, but maintaining your hidden state through these sections isn't easy. So when I'm discovered after headshotting a guard with a weakened silenced pistol, the stat I'm leveling in the background becomes Assault, since I switched over to my big guns to mob the rest of the encounter. Even though I was trying to do just the opposite, in the end my Assault level grew much more rapidly than my Stealth level because Assault was the game's base state. The state the game devolved to the instant I became uncovered. As well, most of the higher level perks I wanted to expand into later in the game were blocked because my stealth level was too low for them to be available. That your perks bore this tie to your playstyle makes sense, but that me putting my attribute points into my cool stat, the overall stat governing stealth, the fact that this didn't matter much to the perks contained inside the cool trees, that made less sense. Those attribute points only minutely bettered my statistics in evasiveness or critical hit chance by a couple of percentage points, or unlocked special dialogue options whose statement required a certain ability point threshold but really didn't hold a huge amount of weight in the long run. The game plays like all of these skills, intelligence, cool, technical, are going to matter, but body, aka hit points, holds far higher importance when the game's default state is running and gunning. The game makes no appreciable difference in either your character's or others' attitudes towards you if you choose not to kill or kill. You're a gun runner, a fixer, one who performs jobs on which others might not want to dirty their hands. Shortly into the game, you might find an ocular modification that makes all your guns non-lethal, or a gun mod that makes your weapons rounds maim, not kill. But functionally, the game plays out no differently should you take either route. And at the outset, before you find either of these band-aid modifications, only there so the developers can say that a non-lethal route through Cyberpunk exists, you're confronted with many a situation that, unless you play perfectly, will result in you killing some people. And once you've done it the first time, besides unfaltering morality, if the game makes no distinction between the paths for killing or not killing, what reason do you have not to take the easiest route? That's what Cyberpunk is all about. The world, while gorgeous, offers little interaction with the player. The AI is bare bones. You can't go into most buildings. Yes, you'll find little pockets with NPCs interacting, crime scenes that come and go, but some obvious paring down was done to some of the loftier promises from past gaming expos. But the most glaring issue is that Cyberpunk 2077's eternal hypothesis, at what point do you stop being you, runs antithetical to it being a video game. No matter how guilty you make me feel, or how much you make me question my decisions, I'm going to replace my eyes with implants, my ankles with ones that let me jump high, my dermal layer with micro armor because it makes my armor number go up. The gang members shooting at me, they don't care how much of my humanity is there. In fact, they're more emblematic of Cyberpunk's philosophy than V ever can be. The core tenet of the Cyberpunk tabletop RPG is that you, as a cyberpunk, embrace body modifications and cyber tech. But at the very best, I ran hypocritical to the questions the game asked about consciousness and the gradual disappearance of my humanity. I'd say one thing in a conversation on sentience with Johnny Silverhand, but always in the back of my head I was keeping track of how many eddies I needed to get the next upgrade at the Ripper Dock. As the player, I want the numbers to go up. But even though she doesn't actively resist, V fights me every step of the way. I don't want her to disappear into cyberpsychosis. I don't want her to irrevocably bond with Johnny Silverhand in her head. I don't want her to succumb to Night City. But me playing the game brings her closer and closer to that inevitable end. Inevitability is pessimism, and Cyberpunk wallows in it. Cognitive dissonance trickles into the fabric of every part of Cyberpunk. You wrestle with your humanity, but still strip your person of every bit of flesh they've got left in the name of becoming a more efficient machine. You see the human price of death firsthand, your own grief at Jackie's death, yet you kill hundreds of enemies without question. Are they less human because of their body modifications and cyberware? The game thinks so, but do you? Cyberpunk is clearly set in the future, but is it really that futuristic in its elements? Cyberpunk's roots in the 1980s shade its attitude toward a variety of societal issues, some of which mar the game's setting as a whole. The notion that trans people are sexually deviant, as emphasized by the in-game advertisements. The yellow peril overtones. Large Japanese conglomerates come to America, run with an emphasis on cutthroat precision and outward honor. The stereotypical gangs. The spiritual Haitian voodoo boys. The Yakuza analogous Tiger Claws. The fucking wacko white people, the Maelstrom. Alright, that one's pretty accurate though. This isn't a fantasy land with no consequences. This is stereotyping gender and race in the core world building of 2077. Tongue-in-cheek or not, we see enough of that shit on a daily basis in the real world, so it's tiring to find the same attitudes crop up in the games we play for our enjoyment. And yet, at the end of the day, I actually loved Cyberpunk 2077. I love flying around on Jackie's motorcycle through the absolutely stunning city. I love digging into the perks, trying to be stealthy, retooling my guns, crafting, realizing that speccing into Cold Blood in tandem with an epic level katana made a hack and slash build just as satisfying as the stealth approach. I was playing on Xbox Series X, which might have masked some of the more glaring glitches and graphical hiccups. But I walked slowly through the Afterlife and the Sunset Motel not because my game was hitching on the frame rate, but because they were simply amazing to survey. The glowing lights, the neon reflections off the ever-puddly asphalt roads. Normally I'll bounce off of looter shooters pretty quickly, but I found that the hunt for better and better weapons was a worthwhile piece of Cyberpunk. If I raided a Tiger Claws bar and didn't find anything of use, I'd just dismantle it and put it toward upgrading the gear I already had, thereby gaining experience in my crafting and making my character better in the process. And even though the duality Cyberpunk exhibits is frustrating at times, and the story it's telling runs counter to how you actually play the game, I so thoroughly enjoyed both parts that even their oil and water combination couldn't tarnish the experience too much. In 1998, the punk band Refused broke up and put out their final manifesto, titled Refused Are Fucking Dead. That they even had a manifesto section of their website should indicate much of what you need to know about Refused. But in this letter, the band decries the powers that be and the corporate co-opting of renegade music, stating, when every expression, no matter how radical it is, can be transformed into a commodity and be bought or sold like cheap soda, how is it then possible that you are going to be able to take art seriously? Cyberpunk, by definition, is the hostile takeover of humanity by baser instincts and technology, where any rebellion is co-opted by the corporate machine. But in 2020, is Cyberpunk valid? Is its exploration worthwhile? Is it even what we need right now? The likes of Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira and William Gibson's Neuromancer helped define cyberpunk as the juxtaposition of low life against high tech, and thereby the bleak acceleration of hyperviolence, sexual revolution, and the breakdown of order. Urban sprawl and neon dominate the landscape. The dregs have overtaken society, and super advanced technology unravels the notion of a soul. Higher morality no longer exists. Nihilism festers. Set against a burgeoning Cold War, nations at odds, at a time when xenophobia and fear of the other reigned, cyberpunk was the unnatural, dystopian extension of the present as lived in the 1980s. And as with all dystopian literature, cyberpunk was a warning. This is what the future might look like if you continue down the path you're on. The tabletop role-playing game setting follows many of the same creeds and staples. Global superpowers have died. In their place are megacorporations that squabble for control. Constant war caused the rapid development of synthetic, cybernetic prosthetics and implants. Built into the framework is technoshock, the inability for some to reconcile their self with what the world has become. Humanity and empathy are measurements that slowly tick down the more you replace of your meat self. And when those counters reach zero, you as a person are lost. Given over to cyberpsychosis, a piece of the machine, dead to all but your tech, a battery. But it's 40 years later now. Cyberpunk is not as fanciful or far-fetched as it was at its inception. By lobbying politicians out of their beliefs, corporations dictate the rules of our land in every way but name. Racial strife not only dominates the news cycle, but has heightened into massive marches. Ominous climatological warnings go unheeded. The bourgeoisie continues to win. Cyberpunk is no longer the warning it was at its outset. Rather, it's a prescient look into a future we see drawing nearer by the day. Food shortages, homelessness, corporate oligarchy, all things not so far-fetched as they were in the 1980s. But cyberpunk is not the warning we need right now, because we all see the end it envisions coming to pass, and far sooner than the year 2077 at that. Cyberpunk needed to reinvent what we thought that future would be, instead of giving us a glimpse of what's at the end of the path we're already on. Cyberpunk 2077 didn't do that. Here is the crux of it. Cyberpunk, in its current iteration, isn't radical. It's not a glitzy imagining of a bygone future. It's a horribly prophetic look at a future we might already be in, or are, at least, in the final stages of transitioning into. Cyberpunk has become the commodity against which it so railed. So, as an extension of Refused's decree, since cyberpunk has become the thing it sought to destroy, can you take it seriously? And by proxy, is it art? Cyberpunk 2077 is almost quaint in that regard. It portrays itself as a revolt against authority, but its existence is a product of that same authority. It tries to present these radical ideas of what could be, but they're ideas we've already grown tired of over the last 4 decades. Ideas that we've already seen come true in our own society. We're almost as far from cyberpunk's inception as 2077 is from our current year. We don't need cyberpunk to present them as problems of the future or an indictment of the work we've yet to do in the present. Refused found that the only way they could continue their fight was to destroy themselves. Cyberpunk cannot do that, and, in an ironic twist, it might end up deader than Refused as a result. Much has been said of both Cyberpunk 2077's performance issues and its review situation, so here's a humble defense of the developers at CD Projekt Red. Take it or leave it. I understand the impulse to want to protect the legacy of something you've created by ensuring it's not seen in an incomplete state. I've written a few shitty novels in my time. If the reviews of something I wrote, going off a prior, unfinished revision of my novel, spend a considerable amount of time highlighting the flaws of my piece, many of which I had gone back and fixed, yeah, I'd want to protect against that. I think it's commendable, or at the very least defensible, to want reviews to reflect the best state of a game. Now, I wouldn't want to have released a novel in a state that warranted such actions, but CD Projekt Red is seemingly torn between the deadlines imposed by upper management and the inability for the development team to reach those goals. I understand the plight from all sides. The managers want a product out the door, the developers want to make a good product, and us buyers just want to enjoy that good product without having been lied to or suckered. And if that product is not up to snuff, the customer has every right to want their money back. That CD Projekt Red put reviewers in this position to review an unfinished game is unfortunate. But shouldn't reviews reflect the game that people, not just reviewers, are going to be playing? This invariably leads to much discourse on the hazy demarcation of when a video game is actually done, and Cyberpunk should not have released when it did if that done state wasn't reached to the developer's satisfaction. But you want to know something else about Refused? About 15 years after their manifesto declared them fucking dead, they got back together. Maybe you already know the other connection. Refused did the music for Johnny Silverhand's band in Cyberpunk 2077. Things that are dead can be revived, retooled, polished, made new again. I didn't play The Witcher 3 at launch, but when I finally got around to it 8 months later, many of the review's most scathing critiques had been remedied. The HDR had been fixed, the most troublesome glitches ironed out. Likewise, the substantial expansions that were released around that time were my favorite parts of the entire game. We're unfortunately in the era of games launching in an unfinished state, and though Cyberpunk 2077, its developers, and its customers are victims of that, the vitriol isn't worth it. Cyberpunk didn't change the future. It was never going to change the future how we envisioned. But Cyberpunk 2077 has a future, one that isn't dead, and knowing the developers at CD Projekt Red, that future is bright. Going back to Refused's manifesto, they begin the letter by stating that since Refused is dead, the individual bandmates that were in Refused are now 5 separate entities. 5 people that can now spread their message 5-fold. As a collective, the band was dead, but the people that participated in it, those people would take its ideas and continue fighting for the betterment of all. The manifesto concludes, "We want every day and every action to be a manifestation of love, joy, confusion, and revolt. We need to look forward. We got everything to win and nothing but our boredom to lose." Love, joy, confusion, revolt. I think those are the emotions Cyberpunk 2077 wanted its players to feel. At what do we feel those emotions? Well, a lot, good and bad. But in the end, it's a video game. By playing it, you have everything to win and nothing but your boredom to lose. Maybe in playing it, you'll feel one of those emotions. I did, all of them in fact, despite the Cyberpunk setting's uneasy place in our current world climate. Maybe you'll take what Cyberpunk 2077 has given you as an experience with you to other games or pieces of art. Playing 2077 for the first time, I felt the infinite possibility in its fabric. Sure, it didn't reach the heights it promised at its outset, but whatever does, video game or otherwise. Regardless of the ending, V remained human for me. A testament to the humanity and empathy the game instilled in me by having me play it, even if there wasn't an explicit number monitoring those characteristics. I like that the only time you ever see your character in the real world is in a mirror. There's no explicit humanity tracker, so every time I came back to my apartment or snuck into a hotel room, I'd take a second to look at myself. Each time I looked, V seemed haggard, despondent, crushed under the weight of it all. This visage reinforced that, for however much fun I was having shooting gangsters or cyber psychos, there were people looking back at me from the other side. Each time it made me pause. Was any of my humanity left? Was any of my empathy still intact? I think that was the game's goal, to give you the fun, otherworldly cyberpunk experience, but also remind you that the human toll of such a society is too great to ever be something for which to strive. It's too grand and enticing to not get lost in, for all its pitfalls. You probably don't need that reminder in 2020, but some people still do.